Let's start with a simple fact. Over 400,000 innocent Americans are currently held in jail. Why? Because of a policy called cash bail. If you don't already know, cash bail is a specific amount of money a defendant has to pay in order to be released from jail after their initial arrest, but before their trial. If they show up for court, the money is then given back. It's basically a security deposit someone has to pay to encourage them to show up for their court date. Advocates for criminal justice reform have been fighting to change the cash bail system for decades.
This is no doubt wealth-based punishment, inflicted while people are still supposed to be presumed innocent.
If we end the cash bail system, it can really help shift the system and make it a more equitable system for all people.
In 2020, it was reported that 74% of people currently held in jails have not been convicted of a crime, leading to over 470,000 people currently held behind bars just because they don't have enough money to pay their way towards freedom. And this is uniquely an American system. The United States is the only other country in the world, apart from the Philippines, to enforce cash bail. In 2021, Illinois became one of the first states to end their cash bail system, marking a milestone for criminal justice reform, while also prompting backlash from local law enforcement.
It is going to make our communities less safe, and we're going to see a spike in every reportable crime.
The debate over cash bail is heating up, so I thought it would be useful to look back into how the cash bail system started in the first place, being altered throughout generations, and leading us to where we are today.
So I guess we should start from the beginning. How did the idea of having to hold someone in detention or jail before their trial come into play?
The idea of holding someone in jail technically started when the Normans invaded Great Britain. They brought with them certain things that just changed everything. The criminal justice system went from a private system to a public system. And they said there are going to be certain crimes that we're going to call crimes against the crown. So they built jails. And they had people that would sit in these jails. And the problem was that the justices traveling around took so long to get there. Jailers were really concerned that if the person in their jail escaped, they would be held accountable.
So they had to decide, at what point should you release someone not yet convicted of a crime out of jail? And what crimes are bad enough that someone shouldn't be released at all? By 1275, the English court said they figured it out when they established the Statute of Westminster. It laid out a list of what are bailable versus non-bailable crimes, and most importantly, clarified that the purpose of bail was for someone's freedom and not intentional imprisonment. Therefore, if someone committed a crime that was bailable, i.e. not that bad, then that person should not be held in jail.
And it told the sheriffs, everybody is bailable, and the exceptions tend to be these incredibly severe crimes.
Now, once these defendants were freed, they needed a way to make sure those people came back for their eventual trial. The system originally relied on unsecured bail bonds. If someone could get someone to act as a surety, meaning someone legally liable to pay their debt if they didn't show up for court, then that person would be released. 400 years later, when the British started establishing colonies in North America, they carried over the same interpretation of a criminal bail system, even loosening some of England's more strict practices, where basically every bailable defendant was released before their trial. Ever since, the concept of bail acting as a means to be freed before a trial has been a constant norm in America since its founding. So much so, in fact, that they felt the need to mention it in the Bill of Rights, under the 8th Amendment.
So the 8th Amendment must be looked in the bail context alongside the 14th Amendment, which provides both an equal protection clause and a due process clause. Anytime the government takes away someone's liberty, you have to do that in a way both that's fair and rational, and also in a way that provides sufficient due process.
Things started to change in the United States when it went from a criminal bail system enforced by unsecured bonds towards ones based on secured bonds in the form of money payments. The difference between unsecured and secured bonds is a little bit confusing. So let's look at it in terms of the carrot and stick model. With the unsecured bond system, the stick was the signed obligation that someone you know will pay the money if you don't show up in court, with the carrot being their release from jail. With the secured money system, the carrot of release is still the same, but if you even want to get that carrot in the first place, you have to take a harsher whack from the stick, which instead of being a simple promise to pay, is actual money already taken out of your wallet. This practice is now what is referred to as cash bail. The reason the secured money system started to become more widely used is that the courts were running out of people willing to take responsibility for someone else's debt owed.
America started getting too big for people to vouch for each other. You no longer necessarily could get a neighbor to say, I know this person's going to show up.
It seemed easier just to charge the defendants outright, and if they couldn't pay, they would simply stay in jail. And that brought up another question that legal scholars faced, which was, if we're going to require someone pay their bail outright, at what point do the bail amounts themselves become excessive? They eventually decided that there was no such point, and that if someone couldn't pay, they would simply stay in jail. This inevitably caused overcrowding in jails.
We had a whole bunch of bailable defendants in jail, and we didn't have anybody that wanted to act as a personal surety for no money. So along come these people that say, well, we'll do it, but we want to be paid.
These people are what we now call bail agents, or bondsmen, where the defendant has to pay them an upfront, non-refundable fee of around 10% of the amount of bail the judge sets. After that payment is made, the bondsman will post their bail for them, granting the release. This service was initially intended to close the gap in between economic classes, as it helped lower income people who were less likely to be able to pay their full bail amount. However, as more and more people were unable to post their bail and therefore relied on bail agents, the industry started to use this leverage to charge more exorbitant fees with higher interest rates if the family was unable to pay upfront, which was oftentimes the case, and even hired bounty hunters to physically track down those who were behind in their payments.
The more you look into bounty hunting, the more you realize, oh my God, what are we doing here in America?
Right now, Lord, we need your help on this one. Let us capture this guy safely. In Jesus' name, amen.
This ultimately worsened disparity in between the economic classes, as the proper payment of bail is given back once you show up for court. Meanwhile, the payments to bondsmen, which gather interest, are theirs to keep forever.
You have to pay that money back even if you show up to every single court date and even if you are found not guilty. So you can be paying this back years after your initial arrest.
Yet they are oftentimes the only escape from indefinite detention until your trial, unless you want to take a guilty plea, which stays on your record your entire life.
Right now, it really functions as predatory lending for poor people.
A lot of people don't read the fine print. When you bond out, you look at the fine print and you're basically waiving your rights as a U.S. citizen.
A lot of people can't even pay the full premium at hand, so contracts with the bond agencies usually include interest rates that basically force the individual and their families to make continuous payments long after their cases are completed.
And you can't write a history of bail without documenting all the abuses from that industry.
In response to the cash bail practice, there have been several attempted ways to reform the system, in either direction. The first one took place in the 1960s. Seeing the increased detention rate solely because of the inability to pay bail, activists fought for reform that de-incentivized judges required secured money bail for release. This led to President Lyndon B. Johnson signing into law the Bail Reform Act of 1966, which encouraged judges to release the defendants on the written promise of their return to court, unless they deemed them to be at high risk for fleeing. Between 1962 and 1971, the amount of felony defendants held in jail before their trial dropped by a third. However, crime started rising in the 1970s and 80s, leading to the second wave of reforms. Cases of released defendants committing violent crimes while awaiting trial started to scare judges away from the more lenient posture encouraged by LBJ's Bail Reform Act.
Our criminal justice system is probably at its weakest point it's ever been.
The courts, the way they're letting people out, it's just like that all the time. It's going to be a lot more killings too.
From what I could tell, they didn't have hardly any data at all showing that people who were released on pretrial release or through bail were committing all these horrendous crimes. We just had stories and anecdotes. And yet they passed some pretty big laws.
A strengthened preventative detention laws, which allows judges to detain defendants if they thought the release posed a safety concern. The Bail Reform Act of 1966 was eventually repealed by the signing of the Bail Reform Act of 1984 by President Ronald Reagan, which authorized the use of preventative detention due to public safety concerns.
We can and must make improvements in the way our courts deal with crime. It's time to get these hardened criminals off the street and into jail.
This helped solidify the revival of secured money bail and pretrial detention in the following decades. So this leads us to the system we have today. The majority of prisoners are still legally innocent, and the commercial bond industry is thriving, turning over a $2 billion profit.
By and large, I believe large insurance companies run the smaller bail bonds companies. They generate a huge amount of wealth.
Over the past 40 years, the number of people in jails and prisons has quadrupled. While the United States has less than 5% of the world's population, it houses 20% of the world's prisoners. This is what we call mass incarceration. It resulted in the total pretrial population more than doubling, totaling 482,000 in 2017. This is all despite declining violent crime rates overall, and the Supreme Court ruling in 1984 that pretrial detention be the, quote, limited exception to the norm of freedom. As the prisoner population increases, more light is being shed on the negative consequences pretrial detention has on the prisoners themselves.
Even just a few days in jail can affect an individual's loss of employment, housing, or even custody of their children. Studies show that there can actually be an increase in likelihood of rearrest for an individual, and it ends up just perpetuating cycles of arrest and incarceration.
Requiring bail also hasn't proven particularly effective at getting defendants to show up for their court date, which was the whole point in the first place. A study in Colorado observed 1,900 defendants and concluded that unsecured bonds were just as effective as money bonds at ensuring court appearances, while at the same time being a lot cheaper since the jail didn't have to pay to house the defendants. Around the country, the climate for bail reform is evolving.
The Black Lives Matter movement has really highlighted the inequalities of our justice system. People are paying closer attention.
A 2018 study showed that 57% of Americans believe in ending the practice of jailing people for not being able to pay their money bail. This momentum helped pave the way for states like New York, New Jersey, and Illinois to overhaul the cash bail systems, while advocates continue to fight to abolish the system on a national level. Like the 1960s, today's movement has its share of opponents. Law enforcement agencies across the US claim that eliminating cash bail can undermine public safety by freeing harmful individuals who would otherwise be in jail.
Imagine a situation where someone murders his own wife. That person has already murdered the possible victim. So that person doesn't pose a specific threat to any other person. So that violent felon could not be held.
It's sort of framed in this narrative of why would you let the bad guy go? But they can be wrong. There is a reason why we have all these procedures to protect people and to sort of like force the government to make their case.
When talking about policies that play a huge role in criminal justice and public safety overall, hearing theoretical arguments about what could or couldn't happen doesn't really provide enough clarity in how these policies actually play out in reality. So I wanted to take the time to look at an example of an area that actually eliminated its cash bail system a while ago, and that's the US Capitol itself. In 1992, Washington, D.C. eliminated its money bail system, becoming a pioneer of a major area getting rid of the practice. So how did it turn out? The city itself has released multiple reports showing that 94% of defendants are released pre-trial, and 91% of those show up in court for the trial, with another report showing that 88% of those released weren't arrested again while waiting for their trial. And this is all while saving the city over $1 million per day. Instead of resorting to cash bail, DC judges use risk assessments, which is a tool that tries to objectively determine the risk level of a defendant not showing up in court or committing another crime. For this, they take into consideration various factors, such as age, past criminal offenses, and employment status. Once the process is complete, they give a recommendation to the judge for how they should proceed. While reformists usually prefer risk assessments as an alternative to cash bail, they come under criticism for racial bias. They often take into account home ownership and income level, conditions that are known to work against communities of color that statistically have lower rates of both. And that points to a larger issue. There can be many ways where attempts to reform the cash bail system actually make it more punitive. So reformists usually focus on eliminating the cash part of the cash bail system. That way, someone's freedom is no longer determined solely by the amount of money they have in their bank account.
Money bail is the primary layer. The thing you care about is money, because money keeps people in jail. It detains people. The bail industry is just a parasitic add-on to that. Bounty hunters is a further parasitic add-on to that. But dealing with money takes care of all the rest of it.
Experts say taking money out of the bail system would lower detention rates overall. That way, the government can focus on funding other public systems. Instead of them spending billions of dollars a year on housing defendants in jail, they could divert those funds to other areas. One of the main reasons that Washington, D.C. has found success in its elimination of cash bail is its well-funded pretrial services. They help remind defendants of their court date and arrange transportation and childcare to help make sure they show up for their trial.
They recognize the need to have human beings to help the defendants. These are just people that need help. Let's give them the help we can so that you can do the least amount of damage to a person who's released pre-trial.
To expand upon this, advocates then pivot to address the larger inequities in our country beyond the bail system. They call for governments to invest further in social programs, such as education, affordable housing, and mental health and addiction services. The argument is that if someone has a stronger support network during some of the most difficult times in their life, they'll be less likely to resort to crime in the first place. Ever since the colonies were established, the US has continued to debate over how it deals with crime and criminal justice. And it's really easy to get caught up in the culture wars these divides cause. But when you get down to it, most of us have largely the same goal. We want ourselves, our family, and our loved ones to live freely and safely as we go about our lives. And when you think about that larger goal, it's really difficult to see how over 400,000 people being kept behind bars simply because they don't have enough money helps make us any safer.
Incarcerating people pre-trial does no one good. Periods of incarceration have devastating effects on people, on communities.
Which has me think about Khalif Browder's case, who was a 16-year-old that ended up in Rikers Island for 3 years because he couldn't post bail after being charged with stealing a backpack.
They told you that you could post bail.
Yes, that's correct.
$10,000.
Yes.
And of course,
I couldn't make that. My family couldn't pay it.
Eventually, the charges were dropped and he was released, but psychological damage was done and he ended up taking his own life.
But then this young lady named Sandra Bland was pulled over by a police officer just for a traffic violation. She ended up getting arrested. She ended up being taken to jail, and she died in jail. Bail had everything to do with her death. She was in jail because of this bail bond, this amount of money that's arbitrary to begin with. And there she is, and she's died in jail for such a tragic cause.
Not surprisingly, many people don't think the system as is working. A recent study showed that 91% of Americans say that the criminal justice system has problems that need fixing. If so many of us agree that our current approach isn't working, isn't it then just common sense to try out new ideas in hopes of improving the situation for all of us?
We want reforms that are going to make the system a more equitable system for everyone. It is one step out of many that we need change, but it's a strong step in the right direction.
If you're still with me, thanks so much for watching. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell to watch more videos like this one.